John Kerry's call for unity against ISIS comes at a time when there's a serious partisan divide over the nuclear talks with Iran. In a letter to Iran's leaders, 47 U.S. Senate Republicans warned that any deal reached now might not exist past the current presidency. During today's hearing, the Secretary of State was asked how he reacted to this letter.
My reaction to the letter was utter disbelief. During my 29 years here in the Senate, I never heard of, nor even heard of it being proposed, anything comparable to this. If I had, I can guarantee you, no matter what the issue and no matter who was president, I would have certainly rejected it. I think no one is questioning anybody's right to dissent. Any senator can go to the floor any day and raise any of the questions that were raised in that. But to write to the leaders in the middle of a negotiation, particularly the leaders that they have criticized other people for even engaging with or writing to write them and suggest that they're going to give a constitutional lesson, which, by the way, was absolutely incorrect, is quite stunning.
All right, let's talk about this with one Republican senator, one of 7, who did not sign that letter. Susan Collins of Maine is joining us. She's a key member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Congressman, give me your reaction to what we just heard from your former Senate colleague, John Kerry.
I think that the letter did represent the wrong approach. Our job in the Senate is to give advice to the president, to the negotiators, to Secretary Kerry. I don't think it's the right approach, nor our job, to write to the Iranians and tell them how our constitutional system works. So I think the letter was a mistake, even though I, too, believe that Congress, that the Senate rather, should be involved in reviewing the ultimate agreement, if there is one, between our government and the Iranian government.
If the letter, Senator, would have been addressed, let's say, to the President of the United States or addressed to the American people, would you have signed that letter?
If the letter had been to the President or Secretary Kerry and had outlined what we think should be the goals of the agreement and the fact that the agreement should come before the Senate for consideration, I would have signed such a letter. But that's not what this letter was.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. What do you want the role of the Senate to be? Because the White House is making it clear whatever deal there is, and there's no deal yet, there might not even be a deal, but let's say there is a deal, the White House is saying this will not be a treaty which would have to go necessarily to the U.S. Senate. They say the only role the Senate would have, and the House of Representatives presumably, would be to ease sanctions imposed by Congress against Iran as part of this deal, because only Congress can ease or reverse some of those sanctions.
It's certainly true that the sanctions are part of the law, so the president has some authority to ease the sanctions, but if he's going to lift them substantially, he has to come to Congress.